The envelope came on a Monday afternoon, the kind of ordinary Monday that gives you no warning before it cuts your life in half. I was standing in the laundry room, folding towels that were still warm from the dryer, thinking about whether Grant would want chicken or soup for dinner. The house was quiet, except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the small click of the dryer cooling down behind me. On the kitchen counter sat a white and blue envelope from Street Agnes Women's Center. I almost didn't open it. For 5 years, envelopes from clinics and hospitals had trained my body to brace before my mind even understood why. They meant test results, bills, denials, another explanation for why hope cost more than grief. I thought it was something from one of our old IVF files, some delayed insurance notice that had found me months too late. Then I saw my sister's name, Kendra Whitfield. Not mine. My fingers stopped moving. The towel slipped halfway from my hands as I read the next line. Date of birth for 2 newborn infants. The 14th of April 2025. Discharge notes. Billing codes. A claim amount of $12,940. I stood there barefoot on my own kitchen floor, reading a document I was never meant to see. Then I reached the emergency contact. Grant Halver. My husband. Under the discharge summary, one line sat there in plain black ink, colder than any accusation could have been. Father acknowledged at bedside. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't call Grant. I didn't call Kendra. I just stood in the yellow kitchen light, holding a hospital claim that said my husband had been standing beside my sister when she left with twins. And then I saw the last signature. Billing support. Verified by Celeste Whitfield. My mother. Please subscribe to support the channel. I bet your phone battery is at 49% right now, right? If that's true, type 7. If not, type 9. Let's see whether I got it right. Alright, enough talking. Let's begin the story. My mother's name on that document did something Grant's name hadn't. Grant's name broke my marriage. Kendra's name broke something older than that, something tied to childhood bedrooms, borrowed sweaters, and the kind of loyalty sisters are supposed to understand before anyone teaches them the word. But my mother's name turned the room around me into a place I didn't recognize, because Celeste Whitfield did not sign things by accident. My mother was 63 years old, a retired church secretary, the kind of woman who kept carbon copies of donation receipts from 2009 and labeled Christmas decorations by room. She believed messes were not solved. They were folded, labeled, and put somewhere guests would never look. She did not misread forms. She did not forget dates. She did not put her name on anything unless she understood exactly how it would look if someone found it later. And I knew that because I was the same way. I'm a medical claims auditor. That means I spend my workdays reading the parts of paperwork most people skip. The codes, the dates, the provider numbers, the tiny changes in wording that turn a normal claim into something that needs a second look. I know the difference between an error and a pattern. I know when a signature belongs where it is, and when it has been placed there to make a story look cleaner than it really is. For years, they made my need for proof sound like a personality defect. Grant used to tease me about it. He said I could find suspicion in a grocery receipt. Kendra said I made life feel like an audit. My mother said I had inherited my grandmother's unfortunate habit of needing everything to make sense. That afternoon, standing in my kitchen with Street Agnes letterhead shaking slightly in my hand, that flaw was the only thing keeping me upright. I carried the claim to the table and sat down. Not because my knees gave out, because sitting down felt like a decision, and I needed one of those. The towel I had been folding stayed on the floor behind me, half open like a white flag I had not agreed to raise. I read the document again from the top. Not as a wife, not as a sister, not as a daughter. As an auditor. Dates first, processed April 23, mailed April 25, delivered to my house by mistake on April 28. Then the billing notes, then the discharge language. Then the verification line, where my mother's name sat quietly, doing what she had always done best. Making something ugly look organized. There was no dramatic confession in that envelope. No apology, no explanation. Just administrative language, clean and bloodless, doing what people had refused to do, telling the truth. I opened my laptop. The screen lit up with a spreadsheet I had been working on that morning, a routine review from a hospital network 2 states away. Rows and columns, numbers that either matched or didn't. For a second, I stared at them and almost laughed, because the world had the nerve to keep being ordinary. Then I created a new folder. I named it Halver. At the time, I thought that folder would only prove adultery. I thought it would prove Grant had lied, Kendra had betrayed me, and my mother had helped them keep it quiet. I didn't know it would eventually prove something much worse. That the guilt I had carried for 5 years had never belonged to me. Grant and I were married in September of 2017, in the small Methodist church where my mother had typed bulletins, arranged flowers, and managed sign-up sheets for half the funerals, and most of the weddings in our county. It rained that morning, a slow gray rain that made the stained glass windows glow darker than usual. Celeste told me rain on a wedding day meant blessings. Kendra stood beside me in a pale blue dress, holding my train with both hands, smiling like she was happy for me. For the first 2 years, having children felt less like a question and more like a room we had not walked into yet. We talked about names while brushing our teeth. We pointed at parks and said, "That would be a good place for a stroller." Grant used to place his hand on my stomach when we watched movies, absent-mindedly, gently, like the future was already there, and only waiting for the right time to arrive. Then the right time came and went. By early 2020, our life had become appointments. Blood work before work. Ultrasounds before sunrise. Pharmacy bags in the passenger seat. 4 IUI cycles. 2 IVF rounds. Bills that arrived in clean white envelopes, as if grief looked better when folded professionally. $74,600 in treatment costs. $31,800 from my own savings, transferred in pieces, so I would not have to look at the whole number at once. I learned how to inject hormones into the soft skin below my navel. I learned which shirts hid bruises. I learned how to smile when women at church asked, when we were finally going to start a family, as if I had misplaced one in a drawer. Grant came to the first appointments. He held my hand. He said the right things. "We're still a team." For a while, I believed him. But grief has a way of revealing who can sit beside you and who only knows how to visit. After every failed cycle, Grant stayed later at work. He took longer drives. He stopped asking what the nurses said unless I brought it up first. He said he needed air. I apologized for needing comfort. I apologized for crying. I apologized for a body I thought had quietly failed the future everyone kept asking me about. My mother never told me to stop apologizing. She would put one cool hand on my shoulder and say, "Grant is hurting too, Mara. Try not to make him feel helpless." So I made myself smaller, quieter, easier to manage. Kendra came with soup after the second IVF failed. She sat on the edge of my bed, rubbed my back, and whispered that she didn't know how I stayed so strong. I remember thanking her. That is the part that still hurts. Not that she lied, not even that she wanted what I had, but that she watched me blame myself, watched me bleed hope into calendar squares and medical bills, and still found a way to stand close enough to comfort me while reaching for my husband. And somewhere behind all of that comfort, my mother was already choosing which truth I was allowed to survive. Kendra had always known how to look harmless. That was her gift. Not intelligence, though she had enough of it when she wanted something. Not beauty, though people had been telling her she was pretty, since she was 12, and learned to lower her chin when she smiled. Her real talent was need. She could make need look soft, innocent, temporary, like helping her was not enabling her, but rescuing her. And I had rescued her for most of my life. When we were kids, Kendra was the one who forgot her permission slips, lost her lunch money, cried when teachers raised their voices, and somehow ended up in my room at night asking if she could sleep on the floor because she had a bad dream. I was 5 years older, which in our house meant I was old enough to understand, old enough to help, old enough not to make things harder for Mom. Celeste had a phrase for it. "Mara, You're the steady one. It sounded like praise when I was young. Later, I understood it was a job assignment. By the time Kendra was 29, the pattern had grown up with us. She needed help paying for her real estate licensing class. I helped. She needed someone to co-sign a short-term apartment lease after a breakup. I refused that one because Grant and I had just taken out another loan for treatment, and my credit score was the one thing in our house still behaving. My mother didn't speak to me for 3 days. Then Kendra needed a place to stay after she quit a brokerage job because, according to her, the manager had a negative energy around ambitious women. She slept on our couch for 2 weeks and used my good towels without asking. Grant was kind to her then. That was what I told myself. He fixed the loose handle on her car door. He looked over a rental application. He let her borrow his truck once to pick up a second-hand desk from Facebook Marketplace. Little things. Brother-in-law things. The kind of things that seemed decent only because I had not yet learned how often betrayal begins under the cover of helpfulness. Kendra liked to sit at our kitchen island while Grant cooked on Sundays. She would swing one bare foot against the stool and ask him questions about roofing estimates, subcontractors, property values, all of it delivered in that wide-eyed way she had when she wanted a man to feel useful. Grant answered her questions with the kind of patience he had stopped using with me. I used to think she was trying to learn. Now I think she was studying him, or at least studying the way he looked when someone made him feel needed. There was one evening I keep returning to, not because it looked important then, but because memory becomes cruel after the truth arrives. It was late summer of 2022. I had just come home from the clinic, after another blood draw. My arm had a cotton ball taped at the bend of the elbow, and I remember being too tired to take it off. Kendra was in our kitchen, leaning over Grant's phone, while he showed her a listing he said was overpriced. Their shoulders were touching. When I walked in, they separated. Not fast, not guilty, just enough. Kendra smiled at me and said, "You look exhausted. Sit down, I'll make tea." I thanked her. I actually thanked her. That is what betrayal does best. It makes a fool out of your kindness after the fact. Over the next year, Kendra became a regular part of our house in a way that never announced itself as dangerous. She came by with groceries after appointments. She called Grant when her garbage disposal jammed. She texted me screenshots of baby blankets and said, "For someday." She remembered every failed test date, every medication change, every time I said I didn't want to talk, and came over anyway. I thought she was refusing to let me suffer alone. What she was really doing was learning the shape of my absence. She learned when I went to bed early, when Grant slept in the guest room after we argued, when I had procedures that left me sore and quiet, when I was too ashamed of my own grief to ask why my husband had started taking calls on the porch. And through all of it, my mother kept giving Kendra excuses before anyone had accused her of anything. "She's lonely, Mara. She looks up to your marriage. She just needs to be around something stable." Stable. That word feels almost funny now. Because all that time, Kendra was not orbiting the stability of my marriage. She was testing the weak places in it. And every time I opened the door because she was my sister, she stepped a little farther inside. Later, I would find dates and receipts for almost every door she walked through. But that summer, all I saw was my little sister needing help again. By then, calling them felt almost childish. They had already answered me in paperwork. I made tea I didn't drink. I turned off the dryer. I picked the towel up from the floor and folded it because leaving it there felt like admitting something had happened before I was ready to let the house know. Then I sat at the kitchen table and did what I had been trained to do when a story looked almost true. I looked for the part that didn't fit. The first thing I checked was the claim number. Street Agnes used a format I recognized, 3 letters followed by 8 digits, tied to the date of service and department. Labor and delivery. 2 newborns. Separate pediatric entries attached to one maternal account. Whoever had processed it had done nothing strange. That was the strange part. The hospital had treated the whole thing as ordinary. So I started with what was mine to access. Our joint account. Grant and I had kept separate personal accounts for most of our marriage. At the time, I thought it meant trust. We each paid our own credit cards, kept our own savings, and used the joint account for mortgage, utilities, groceries, insurance. Clean, practical, adult. Now it felt like a locked door with one window left open. I pulled 12 months of statements and downloaded them as PDFs. I searched Dayton first, 4 gas station charges, 2 restaurant receipts, 1 hotel charge from a Hampton Inn off I-75. Then another, always midweek, always one night, always on dates when Grant had told me he was meeting suppliers or checking jobs outside Columbus. I opened my calendar. One of those Dayton nights was 3 days after my second IVF transfer. I remembered that week with a clarity I hated. I had been lying on the couch with a heating pad under my sweatshirt while Grant kissed my forehead and said he had to drive out early because the treatment bills aren't going to pay themselves. He had left me recovering from a procedure so he could drive toward the life he was building with my sister. That was the part that made me close my eyes. Not the hotel. Not yet. The guilt. I kept going. The $18,000 transfer to Celeste was dated the 6th of February 2025. The memo line said, for K, not Kendra, just K. A small abbreviation. As if fewer letters made the betrayal more discreet. 3 days later, I found the matching rent deposit in an email Grant had forwarded to himself from my mother and never deleted. Dayton lease deposit, first month, second month, same total. Broken into 2 payments. I took screenshots. Downloaded statements. Saved the email. Renamed files by date. 6 de fevereiro de 2025 Grant to Celeste 18,000. The 9th of February 2025 Dayton lease deposit. The 14th of April 2025 St. Agnes twin delivery claim. I did not add commentary. I did not type liar, sister, mother, betrayal, though every one of those words moved through my head like weather. Facts did not need adjectives. They became heavier without them. By midnight, the Halver folder had subfolders, bank records, medical claim, travel, Kendra. Under Kendra, I saved a screenshot of a photo she had posted and deleted months earlier. I had only found it because my phone still held the preview in an old message thread with Ruth Delaney from work. Kendra had been standing in a small apartment kitchen, one hand on her stomach, laughing at something outside the frame. On the counter behind her was a set of keys with a red roofing company tag. Grant's Company. I stared at that little red tag longer than I should have. It was such a small thing, a keychain, plastic, probably worth less than $1. But people are often betrayed by the cheap things they forget to hide. At 8:12 the next morning, I called Vaughn Mercer's office. His assistant asked what kind of matter I needed help with. I looked at the folder open on my laptop, at my husband's name, my sister's name, my mother's name, all sorted now into neat rows of evidence. Divorce, I said. Then, after a pause, and maybe something else. Grant texted me at 8:47 that same morning, while I was still sitting in my car outside Vaughn Mercer's building, watching people in work clothes carry coffee through the revolving doors, like the world had not tilted overnight. Long day. Might have to run up to Cleveland after the supplier meeting. Don't wait up. I read it once, then again. Cleveland. The lie was almost insulting in its laziness. By then I had 3 hotel charges in Dayton, a lease deposit, a hospital claim, and a photo with his company keys on Kendra's counter. But there he was, still writing fiction in the same casual tone he used when asking me to pick up milk. I typed nothing back. For years, I had mistaken silence for weakness. That morning, silence felt like the first clean thing I owned. Kendra texted before lunch. Hey, Mom said you've been quiet. Are you okay? No heart emoji. No sisterly nickname. Just a careful little sentence dressed up as concern. I stared at it while standing in the courthouse hallway, Vaughn's intake packet tucked under my arm. Kendra was not checking on me. She was checking the temperature of the room she had helped set on fire. I didn't answer her either. By 2 o'clock, my mother called. I let it ring until voicemail. Then, because I knew Celeste well enough to know she would choose her words as if someday they might be read aloud, I played it on speaker in my parked car. Mara, sweetheart, it's Mom. I think we should all have dinner Sunday. Just family. There are things that need to be handled carefully. Not everything has to become a public wound. A pause. Too long. Then her voice softened into the tone she used at church when comforting widows in front of other people. I know you're upset, but please remember, children are involved. Children. Not betrayal. Not lies. Not my husband. Not my sister. Children. She had already chosen the shield she wanted to stand behind. I saved the voicemail. That evening, Grant came home around 9:30. I heard his truck before I saw the headlights slide across the living room wall. I was at the kitchen table with my laptop closed, a mug of cold tea beside me, and a grocery list in front of me because some part of me wanted proof that I could still write ordinary words. Eggs, bread, dishwasher tabs. He walked in smelling like rain and sawdust. He kissed the top of my head. I let him. That was the hardest part of the day. Not because I wanted him close, because I understood, in that small contact, how easy it had been for him to live two lives. One hand on my shoulder, one life in Dayton, a kiss on my hair, twins in a hospital room. You okay? He asked. I looked up at him. Just tired. He nodded, relieved by how little effort the lie required from me. Across town, I knew Kendra was probably waiting for an update. My mother was probably rehearsing Sunday dinner in her head, deciding which parts of the truth could be folded small enough to fit under the word family. And me, I sat there, with every document saved twice. I thought I had uncovered an affair. But my mother's voicemail made me understand something colder. They were not just hiding what happened. They were trying to decide how much of it I was allowed to know. Vaughn Mercer's office was on the 9th floor of a brick building downtown, the kind of place that looked less like justice and more like paperwork that had learned to wait. The carpet was gray, the walls were beige. Somewhere behind the reception desk, a printer kept starting and stopping, spitting out pages with the patient rhythm of a machine that had seen more marriages end than most pastors. I arrived 10 minutes early. That was another habit people liked to mock until they needed it. Vaughn was 52, narrow-framed, silver at the temples, with the tired eyes of a man who no longer confused panic with urgency. He didn't offer me sympathy first. He offered coffee. When I said no, he nodded like that answer told him something. Then I opened the folder. For almost 20 minutes, he said nothing. He read the hospital claim, the bank transfer, the Dayton hotel charges, the forwarded lease email, the photo with Grant's roofing company key tag. He took notes with a black pen, slow and precise, never once making the small, pitying sounds people make when they want you to know they understand pain they cannot possibly understand. When he reached my mother's name on the billing verification line, he stopped. Not long, just long enough. Then he went back and read that page again. This is not just adultery, he said finally. I had known that, somewhere in my body, before he said it. Still, hearing it out loud made the room feel smaller. He turned one page toward me and tapped the $18,000 transfer with the end of his pen. If this came from marital funds, it matters. If it came from a business account and was disguised as an expense, it matters more. If your mother signed anything to obscure the relationship between the parties involved, that may become discoverable. Discoverable. A clean legal word for the ugly act of dragging hidden things into light. I looked at my mother's signature again. I had seen Celeste sign birthday cards, church receipts, permission forms, condolence notes. Her handwriting always had the same careful slant, the same little loop on the C, like even ink had been taught to behave. What does that mean for her? I asked. It means, Vaughn said, that your mother may not be a bystander. I sat very still. There are sentences that hurt because they surprise you, and there are sentences that hurt because they confirm what you were hoping not to know. That one was the second kind. Vaughn leaned back, folding his hands over the file. People rarely hide one thing this carefully, unless something bigger is attached to it. I thought of Celeste's voicemail. Children are involved. Not I'm sorry. Not I should have told you. Children are involved. A shield. A script. A warning. When I left his office, the divorce petition was in my bag, but it no longer felt like the only paper that mattered. The elevator doors closed around me, and I watched my reflection in the brushed metal wall. Same coat. Same face. Same woman. But not the same daughter. For the first time, I understood I might not only be leaving my husband. I might be walking out of a whole family system built to keep me grateful, quiet, and uninformed. I went back to work the following Monday, because ordinary places can sometimes hold you together better than empty houses. The office looked exactly the same. Fluorescent lights. Gray cubicles. The smell of burnt coffee from the break room. Someone had left a box of grocery store donuts near the printer with a yellow sticky note that said, "Help yourself," as if sugar could repair whatever people carried in with them. I sat at my desk, opened a claims review, and stared at the same line item for 11 minutes. Procedure code. Provider ID. Date of service. None of it stayed where my eyes put it. Around 10:30, Ruth Delaney appeared beside my cubicle with 2 paper cups of tea. Ruth was 58, a senior nurse case manager, and one of those women who could read a room before anyone in it said a word. She had short gray hair, sensible shoes, and the kind of calm that didn't feel soft. It felt earned. She set 1 cup beside my keyboard. "Chamomile," she said. "You look like coffee would turn you into a lawsuit." I almost smiled. Almost. Ruth didn't ask what happened. She didn't lean over my desk or lower her voice into drama. She just pulled the visitor chair closer and sat like she had all the time in the world, which was Ruth's way of telling you she knew you didn't. For a while, I said nothing. Then I told her enough. Not everything. Not the whole ugly shape of it, just the hospital claim. Kendra. Grant. My mother's name. The money. Vaughn's warning that Celeste might not be a bystander. Ruth listened without interrupting. That was rare. Most people hear pain and immediately start trying to organize it into something they can answer. Ruth let it stay messy. When I finished, she picked up her tea and looked past me toward the row of filing cabinets against the wall. Then she asked the question that changed the direction of everything. "Mara," she said, "are you sure all the infertility records you saw back then were yours?" I turned toward her. "What do you mean?" She didn't answer quickly. Ruth never rushed important things. She took a breath, then said, "In fertility cases, women usually become the file. Blood work, ultrasounds, medication schedules, procedure notes, everything gets centered around the woman's body, because that's where the visible work happens. But visible doesn't always mean responsible." I felt the words settle somewhere low in my chest. Responsible. That was the word I had been carrying for years without anyone handing it to me directly. Ruth continued carefully. "I'm not saying anything is true. I'm saying if your mother had access to documents, and if your husband had any medical history that mattered, you need to know whether something was kept out of your view." For a second, the office disappeared. I was back in 2020, standing in our half-torn kitchen, while contractors pulled out cabinets and dust covered everything. Grant and I had boxed up paperwork from the hall closet and taken some of it to Celeste's house for safekeeping. Insurance files, old tax records, medical folders, a blue plastic storage bin with a cracked lid. Grant's workers' compensation records from 2016 had been in that bin. He had fallen at a job site before we met, or that was how he always told it. A scaffold accident, hip injury, surgery, 4 months off work. He joked about it sometimes when the weather changed and his back stiffened. He never talked about anything else. I remembered Celeste returning that bin months later. I remembered one folder tucked sideways, its label facing the wrong direction. I remembered noticing it and not caring because I was tired, because the kitchen still didn't have a sink, because another test had come back negative that morning. Now I cared. Ruth watched my face change. "There's something," she said quietly. I nodded, but I couldn't speak yet. That night, I went home and pulled the blue bin from the garage shelf. Dust came down on my sleeve. The cracked lid made a brittle snapping sound when I opened it. Inside were old policies, receipts, tax envelopes, warranties for appliances we no longer owned. And beneath them, Grant's 2016 medical file. I placed it on the concrete floor in front of me and sat down slowly. For 5 years, I had searched my own body for the missing answer. I had never thought to search his history. Please subscribe to support the channel. I bet you're watching this video right now while lying down with your legs crossed, right? If that's true, type 3. If not, type 4. Let's see whether I got it right. Alright, enough talking, let's begin the story. The file was thinner than I expected. That was the first thing I noticed, sitting on the garage floor under the bare bulb, with dust on my sleeve and cold concrete pressing through my jeans. For a surgery that had supposedly changed the way Grant walked in bad weather, there were not many pages. Intake form, imaging summary, physical therapy notes, workers' compensation approval, the kind of paperwork that says a body was injured, treated, and sent back into the world with instructions to be careful. Then I found the specialist report. It had been folded once, then flattened, then tucked behind a stack of billing pages like someone had wanted it present but not visible. I recognized the format immediately. Referral note, follow-up recommendation. Clinical language careful enough to sound harmless unless you knew how to read what it was avoiding. I read the paragraph 3 times. Possible reproductive complications. Recommended urology follow-up. Further testing advised before family planning. I stopped breathing for a second. Not because it proved everything. It didn't. A warning was not a diagnosis. A recommendation was not a verdict. But it was enough to make 5 years of certainty crack down the middle. Grant had never mentioned it. Not during the first appointment. Not during the tests. Not while I injected medication into my stomach and apologized for every negative result like I had personally failed him. Not once. I turned the page with fingers that felt strangely far away from me. Behind it was a yellow sticky note, curled at one corner, the adhesive almost dry. The handwriting was my mother's. I knew it before I finished reading. Celeste wrote grocery lists, church reminders, and birthday cards, with the same careful slant, the same controlled loops, the same pressure, like even a pen should know its manners. Do not show M. Yet. Just that. Not ask Mara. Not talk to them. Not this matters. Do not show M. Yet. I sat there for a long time, holding that note in the weak garage light, and something in me went quiet in a way that was not peace. It was recognition. My mother had seen it. Maybe she had not understood every medical term. Maybe she had told herself she was preventing panic. Maybe she had folded her fear into one of those noble-sounding reasons women like Celeste used when they wanted control to look like care. But she had known enough to hide it. And that meant, while I was counting follicles and bruises, while I was smiling at church ladies and swallowing shame with prenatal vitamins, my mother had been sitting on a piece of paper that could have changed where the blame landed. I had thought the cruelest thing she did was help hide Kendra's twins. I was wrong. The cruelest thing was letting me believe the emptiness in our house began with me. Celeste's dinner invitation came the next afternoon, though invitation was too gentle a word for it. She called while I was still sitting on the garage floor with Grant's old medical file open in front of me and her sticky note lying beside it like a small yellow confession. I let the phone ring until it stopped. A minute later, a text came through. Sunday, 6 o'clock. Please come. We need to talk as a family. As a family. There are phrases people use when they want the room to sound softer than the thing waiting inside it. My mother had built an entire life out of those phrases. Keep the peace. Handle it privately. Don't make people choose sides. Think of the children. As if pain became more respectable when it was spoken in plural. I did not answer right away. I photographed the sticky note. Scanned the report. saved both into the Halver folder, then sent copies to Vaughn. Only after the upload completed did I type back, "I'll be there." That Sunday, May 18, I drove to my mother's house with the black folder on the passenger seat. The same folder Vaughn had told me to keep organized, clean, and duplicated. I had slept badly the night before, but not because I was afraid of what they would say. I was afraid of how familiar it would all sound. Celeste's house looked exactly the way it always did when she wanted control. Porch swept. Hydrangeas watered. Curtains opened just enough to suggest warmth without inviting anyone to look too closely. In the entryway, there was a flyer for the women's charity luncheon at church, Pastor Glenn Armitage's name printed beneath my mother's in careful blue script. I stood there looking at it for half a second too long. Then Celeste opened the door. She wore pearl earrings and a navy cardigan, the version of herself she put on when she wanted people to remember she was respectable before they remembered anything else. She touched my arm lightly. "Mara," she said, "thank you for coming." I stepped inside. Grant was already in the living room, standing near the fireplace with his hands in his pockets. He looked tired, but not broken. Not yet. Kendra sat on the couch, pale and thin in a beige sweater, her hair pulled back like she had dressed herself to look fragile. The twins were not there. That told me more than anything else. They had not come to show me a family. They had come to manage a problem. Dinner was already on the table, untouched. Roast chicken, green beans, rolls in a cloth-lined basket. My mother had made Sunday food, comfort food, the kind of food people use when they want betrayal to sit down politely. No one reached for a plate. Celeste cleared her throat first. "Mara, I know you're hurt," she said. "No one is denying that. But there are babies involved now. Innocent babies. And whatever mistakes were made, we have to be careful about how much damage we create going forward." Mistakes. I looked at Grant. He looked at the floor. Kendra whispered, "I never wanted it to happen like this." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because there are sentences so useless, they should not be allowed to take up air. Celeste continued, softer now. "You filed for divorce. That is your choice. But I am asking you, as your mother, not to drag this through court in a way that humiliates everyone. Kendra is already overwhelmed. Grant is trying to do the right thing. And those children should not grow up under a cloud of bitterness." I set my purse on the chair beside me. Then I placed the black folder on the dining room table. The sound it made was small. Still, every face in the room changed. I opened the folder slowly, not because I wanted drama, but because my hands had learned by then that order was the only thing standing between me and collapse. First, I placed the Street Agnes claim on the table. Kendra looked away. Then the discharge summary with Grant's name listed as the father at bedside. Grant closed his eyes. Then the bank transfer. $18,000 from Grant to Celeste on February 6. Then the forwarded lease deposit for the Dayton apartment. Then the hotel receipts. Then the photo of Kendra in that small kitchen with Grant's roofing company key tag on the counter behind her. My mother said nothing. That was when I knew she had expected those pages. She had prepared herself for the affair. For the money. For the apartment. For the twins. So I took out the last 2 pages. Grant's 2016 specialist report. And the yellow sticky note. "Do not show M yet." I slid both across the table toward Celeste. Her face changed before anyone else understood why. The color left her slowly, not all at once, like water draining from a sink. Her hand moved toward the note, then stopped halfway there. Grant picked up the medical report first. "What is this?" he asked. I did not answer him. I looked at my mother. "How long?" I asked. Celeste swallowed. "Mara, this isn't the time." "It is exactly the time." Kendra's voice came thin from the couch. "What is that?" I kept my eyes on Celeste. "How long did you know there was a chance the fertility problem wasn't mine?" The room went so quiet I could hear the refrigerator click on in the kitchen. Grant looked up from the report. "What does she mean?" Celeste pressed her lips together, And for 1 second I saw the old church secretary in her, the woman who believed any disaster could be managed if the bulletin was printed correctly and the right people were kept out of the room. "I was trying to protect everyone," she said. "No," I said. "You were protecting the version of everyone that made you look good." Grant's hand tightened around the report. "Mom?" She flinched at the word. Not because he sounded angry, because he sounded young. I turned to him then. This report recommended follow-up before family planning. It was in the files my mother kept during our kitchen renovation. She saw it. She wrote that note. And for 5 years, she let me believe my body was the reason we couldn't have children. Kendra stood, one hand pressed to her stomach as if the babies were still there to shield her. "Mara, please," she whispered. I looked at her. "You are very late for please." Then, I placed one finger on the report. "And if this was serious enough to matter then, Grant, you may want to ask yourself why everyone was so certain those twins were yours." No one moved. Grant turned toward Kendra. Celeste gripped the edge of the dining table, pale now in a way no cardigan, no pearls, no Sunday dinner could soften. That was why my mother went white. Not because I knew about the affair. Because she realized the lie she had controlled had created another one she could not. Grant did not come after me when I left my mother's house that night. No one did. That was the first honest thing any of them had done in weeks. I drove home with the windows cracked, though the air was cool, because I needed to feel something that had not been arranged, managed, or explained to me by someone else. My phone buzzed 3 times before I reached the highway. Once from Grant. Twice. From Celeste. Kendra did not call. I think some part of her understood that silence was the only apology she had left. I did not answer any of them. The divorce moved forward in July. Vaughn handled most of the communication because I had finally learned that access to me was not a family right. It was a privilege, and every person at that dinner table had spent years overdrawing the account. Grant looked smaller in mediation, not poorer, not ruined, just reduced by the weight of finally seeing himself without the story he had used to survive. He asked once, quietly, if there was any version of us where we could start over now that he knew more. I looked at him for a long time. "There are truths that arrive too late to save a marriage," I said. "But still early enough to save the woman leaving it." He cried then. I did not. That surprised me less than I thought it would. Celeste called for weeks afterward, never quite asking forgiveness, always asking for discretion. She wanted the $18,000 kept out of anything public. She wanted Pastor Glenn spared the details. She wanted Kendra protected from gossip. She wanted the babies protected from bitterness. What she never said was that she wanted me protected from lies. So I told her once, and only once, "You should have thought about family before you made your daughter carry a shame that wasn't hers." After that, I stopped picking up. I never found out in any official way who the twins' biological father was. Maybe Grant did. Maybe Kendra told him. Maybe the truth arrived in another envelope, another report, another clean white page that made someone else's kitchen go still. By then, it was no longer my room to stand in. A year later, I left the insurance company and started consulting for couples going through fertility treatment, helping them read records, understand claims, and ask for every result in writing. I did not name the work after myself. Pain does not need a plaque to become useful. I lost a husband. I lost a sister. In some ways, I lost the mother I thought I had, but I got back something they had taken quietly, piece by piece, the truth about myself. And after 5 years of blaming my body, my patience, my failure, my lack of faith, I will not spend one more day carrying guilt for people who chose lies and called it love. If Mara's story teaches us anything, it is that love without truth is not protection. It is a room with the lights turned off, where one person keeps bumping into walls while everyone else insists the darkness is for their own good. Families can hurt us, in the name of peace. They can ask us to stay quiet, to protect a reputation, to forgive before we are ready, to carry pain that does not belong to us because speaking the truth would make the wrong people uncomfortable. But silence is not always kindness. Sometimes, silence is where betrayal learns how to grow. Mara spent years believing her body had failed her. She apologized for grief she did not create. She made herself smaller so other people could feel less guilty. And that is something many people understand, even outside of marriage or infertility. Sometimes, we are taught to be the steady one, the forgiving one, the one who understands, the one who keeps the family together. But being strong should never mean becoming the place where everyone else hides their lies. The most powerful part of Mara's journey is not that she exposed them, it is that she stopped needing their version of the truth. She stopped asking people who had lied to her to explain her own worth. She looked at the evidence, faced the pain, and chose herself without turning cruel. That is real resilience. Not revenge, not shouting the loudest, not making everyone suffer the way you suffered. Resilience is standing in the wreckage and saying, I will not rebuild my life around the lie that broke it. Sometimes forgiveness may come later. Sometimes it may not. But healing begins when we stop carrying guilt that was handed to us by people who refuse to be honest. So now I want to ask you, what would you have done if you were in Mara's place? Could you forgive Grant, Kendra, or Celeste? Or would walking away be the only way to survive? Share your thoughts in the comments. I truly want to know where you stand on this story. And if this story moved you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us for more stories about truth, family, betrayal, and the strength it takes to finally choose yourself.